Fire was the first thing he could not bear to look at. Not the fire of a hearth, not the fire that runs through dry grass under a hard wind, but a brightness that seemed alive with will, like iron pulled from a furnace and made into light. Before it stood Enoch, a man from the old world, a father, a son of Jared, a figure the book of Genesis treats with almost shocking brevity. A few lines, a name in a genealogy, 365 years. Enoch walked with God, then he was no more, because God took him. That is all the Hebrew Bible says plainly. And yet those few lines opened a space that later generations could not leave alone. They kept returning to him because the silence around him was too large. In a chapter where every life ends with the same heavy drumbeat, and he died, Enoch breaks the pattern. He enters history like other men, through begetting and years and household duties, but he does not leave it like other men. The old formula stops. Death is not named. Instead, there is movement, removal, taking. In the ancient imagination, that mattered. It meant this was not simply another ancestor. This was a man who, somehow, crossed a boundary. To understand why later Jewish tradition built such a vast world around him, we have to begin where that tradition itself begins. In the age before the flood, in the memory of a human world growing old before it had yet learned wisdom. The genealogies of Genesis are spare, but they stretch like long shadows. Adam to Seth, Seth to Enoch, generations rising and falling under a sky that, in ancient thought, was not empty space but a layered order, a creation full of thresholds. This was a world where heaven and earth were not imagined as sealed off from one another. Dreams mattered, blessings mattered, sin mattered, so did the unseen. Enoch belongs to the 7th generation from Adam, a number that later readers did not miss. In biblical writing, numbers often carry weight, not as puzzles to be cracked, but as patterns that give shape to memory. 7 suggests completion, fullness, a design reaching a point of meaning. So by the time later apocalyptic writers looked back at Enoch, they saw not just a name in a line, but a man positioned at a hinge in sacred history, close enough to the beginnings of the world to hear its deep grammar, close enough to judgment to understand what was coming. The later work known as 2 Enoch, preserved in Christian Slavonic manuscripts but rooted in much older Jewish traditions, takes that silence in Genesis and fills it with assent, vision, warning, order, and awe. It does not pretend that Genesis already said all these details. It expands, imagines, interprets. It asks what kind of man is taken by God, and what might such a man see if the distance between the human and the divine were briefly crossed. The answer it gives is immense. 10 heavens, rebel watchers, the courses of the sun and moon, paradise, judgment, the throne of God. Books written at divine command. A human being clothed in glory and sent back, for a little while, to speak. But before there is assent, there is life on earth. It is easy, in later legend, to make Enoch too strange too early, to remove him from the dust and labor of family existence. The old texts do not do that. They root him in lineage. He is born, he fathers Methuselah, he lives among sons and daughters. That matters, because the world he will leave is still a world of fields, tents, kinship, seasons, and obligation. Ancient households were not private islands. A man carried responsibility for memory, worship, justice, inheritance, and the moral direction of those under his roof. To walk with God in that setting did not mean escape from ordinary life. It meant moving through ordinary life with unusual fidelity. What did that look like? The text does not say directly. and that silence should make us careful. But later tradition answers not with miracles at first, but with integrity. Enoch becomes, in memory, a righteous man in a corrupting age, someone who does not follow the drift, a man whose life forms a contrast before his visions ever do. In a world of growing violence, he is remembered for closeness to God. In a world fascinated by power, he becomes a witness to order. In a world moving toward flood, he is given sight. That is why the story grips people, not simply because it speaks of heaven, but because it begins with a human question that never goes away. What happens when a person lives so near to the will of God that the ordinary border between earth and heaven no longer seems final? What is shown to such a person? And if he returns with words, are those words comfort, warning, or both? The later narrative answers by taking us to the edge of terror. Enoch does not stroll into heaven like a tourist wandering into a brighter province. He is summoned. He is overwhelmed. He is carried into realities too large for human speech. He sees order, and he sees rebellion. He sees beauty, and he sees consequence. He sees that judgment is not a divine mood, but part of a moral structure built into creation itself. And so the story begins, not with a lecture, not with a map of 10 heavens, but with an old man in the first month of the year, overtaken by sorrow before he understands why. In later tradition, grief comes before revelation. That feels true to the deeper rhythm of biblical experience. Great callings often begin with disturbance, not clarity. Something breaks the surface of ordinary time. A life is interrupted, a messenger arrives, and after that, nothing is simple again. Chapter 2. He is lying down when the summons comes, not in a sanctuary, not in a royal court, in his house, in the place where age and habit would have made the familiar feel most secure. Then suddenly, the room is no longer ordinary. 2 figures stand beside him, and later tradition lingers over their appearance, because human language has to strain when it tries to describe a being that is not of earth. Their faces shine like the sun, their eyes burn, their garments flash with color and brightness, their wings gleam, their hands are white as snow. Enoch wakes into terror. That detail matters. In biblical and post-biblical literature alike, the first human response to the heavenly is very often fear, not because heaven is evil, but because it is unbearably real. These are not soft consolations. They are messengers from the eternal God, and they arrive with authority. In the later account, they call Enoch by name and tell him not to be afraid. The same pattern found throughout Scripture. When a human being stands too close to glory, reassurance comes, but only after the shock. Then the command. He is to go with them. But first, he must speak to his household. No one is to search for him. No one is to try to follow. He is to give final instructions and leave the rest in the hands of God. That scene is one of the most human in the whole tradition. Before the heavens open, there is the ache of departure. Before mysteries are revealed, there is a father gathering sons. Ancient life was built on continuity of household. A man did not simply vanish from a family without leaving behind anxiety, property questions, ritual responsibilities, and the fragile thread of authority. So Enoch does what righteous men in biblical memory often do at moments of transition. He blesses, warns, and entrusts. The language later put on his lips is striking because it is not filled with curiosity about heaven. It is filled with moral urgency. Do not chase empty powers. Do not bow to what did not make the heavens and the earth. Do not be seduced by what looks strong but has no life in it. There is something deeply ancient in that warning. Long before Israel stood against the carved gods of surrounding nations, the biblical imagination already framed idolatry as a tragic exchange, giving devotion to what cannot hear, cannot speak, cannot save. In a world full of visible forces, Enoch points his household back to the unseen Creator. That is another reason the story endured. Its center is not spectacle. Its center is allegiance. He gathers his children and the members of his house. Later manuscripts name sons, though traditions vary. Methuselah stands in the foreground because he will carry the family line onward toward Noah, toward the flood, toward the next great judgment in the biblical story. Enoch does not pretend to understand everything that is about to happen. He tells them plainly that he does not know where he is going in full, or what lies ahead. That humility is important. A true visionary in Jewish tradition is not great because he controls revelation, but because he receives it. He is not master of the mystery. He is its witness. Then comes the separation. The messengers lift him. The later text imagines an ascent through clouds into the first heaven, beginning not with the throne room of God, but with the ordered regions above the earth. That makes sense in the world of ancient cosmology. Heaven is layered. Not all heights are equal. The divine court is not reached in a single motion. Between earth and the highest heaven lie domains of weather, stars, imprisoned powers, paradisal spaces, angelic orders, and cosmic functions. The ascent is not only upward, it is educational. Enoch will learn that creation is structured, ranked, governed, and morally charged all the way through. This layered view of the universe was not unique to one text. Ancient Jews, like many peoples of the ancient Near East and Mediterranean world, imagined the cosmos in levels or regions. The biblical writings themselves speak in different ways of heavens, waters above, firmament, the deep, Sheol below, and the throne of God beyond ordinary reach. What 2 Enoch does is dramatize that worldview in narrative form. It turns cosmology into pilgrimage. And yet even here, at the moment of ascent, the story resists the temptation to become mere fantasy. Enoch is not soaring in delight. He is being taken because he was summoned. The tone remains grave. The heavens he enters are not playgrounds of wonder detached from moral life below. They are extensions of divine rule. Everything he sees will cast light back on the earth he has just left. That is part of the script's deeper power. It teaches by reordering perspective. The man who walks with God does not escape the world in order to forget it. He is shown the larger frame in which the world makes sense. He sees what supports rain and snow, what restrains rebellion, what remembers the dead, what measures the lights in the sky, what keeps a record of deeds, what waits for the unjust, what is promised to the faithful. The heavens are not an alternative to history. They are the hidden dimension that exposes history for what it is. So Enoch rises from the house of his fathers into the first of 10 heavens, carrying with him the tenderness of farewell and the weight of unfinished human time. His sons remain below, under the open sky, still within the uncertainty of earthly life. He moves upward into regions where uncertainty gives way to pattern, where every power has its place, and where the first lessons of the ascent will not be about glory alone, but about order. Chapter 3. The first heaven is not yet the final mystery. It is the borderland between the world men know and the powers that sustain it. Here later tradition places the storehouses of weather, the waters above, the shaping of cloud and dew, the hidden sources of snow and rain. To a modern mind, these may sound like poetic mistakes about meteorology, To the ancient imagination, they were something more serious. Weather was not random. Fertility, storm, drought, and season all belonged to the moral and sacred texture of life. If rain failed, people hungered. If rivers rose, cities trembled. If dew came gently, fields lived. So the first heaven is not trivial. It is the level where provision and vulnerability meet. Enoch sees angelic figures set over these things, guardians of processes human beings depend on but do not command. That idea fits a wider pattern in Jewish apocalyptic thought, where heavenly beings are often connected to the governance of cosmic and earthly orders. The point is not that each drop of rain requires a tiny divine assistant in the childish sense. The point is that creation is administered, not abandoned. The world is not self-owning. Even its most physical rhythms answer upward. He looks and keeps looking because the ascent is cumulative. Every level reveals that what seemed ordinary from below is embedded in a larger architecture. Clouds are not just clouds. Dew is not just dew. The sky itself feels inhabited by intention. Then the tone changes. In the second heaven, the brightness gives way to depth and confinement. Here, tradition places rebel beings under restraint, prisoners awaiting a future judgment. Their darkness is not mere absence of light. It is the moral consequence of revolt. These are not yet the final condemned in the later scheme. They are held, waiting, grieving, distorted by their separation from the order they abandoned. It is here that the story touches one of the oldest and most difficult interpretive questions around Enochic literature, the problem of the Watchers. Genesis 6 speaks only briefly of the sons of God, the daughters of men, and the Nephilim, in language so compressed that debate about its meaning has lasted for centuries. Later Enochic tradition expands that brief and troubling passage into a full account of heavenly beings who descended, transgressed boundaries, corrupted the earth, and taught destructive knowledge. 2 Enoch stands within that wider world of interpretation, though it tells the story in its own way. The imprisoned rebels Enoch sees are part of that same moral universe, where celestial disobedience and human ruin become tangled together. Enoch hears their grief. Some traditions even show them asking for intercession, which is one of the script's most unsettling reversals. Heavenly beings, once imagined as strong and glorious, now plead before a mortal man. But Enoch does not become their judge. He remains what he is, human, limited, a witness rather than a sovereign. That restraint keeps the story from drifting into arrogance. Even in ascent, man does not become God. Then comes the third heaven, and here the tradition becomes sharper, more paradoxical, and more memorable still, because paradise and punishment stand near one another within a single revealed landscape. On one side, a garden of impossible abundance, trees heavy with fruit, fragrance in the air, the tree of life at the center, streams flowing outward in symbolic richness, often described in ways that recall Eden and the 4 rivers of the beginning. On the other side, a place of punitive darkness and flame, of thirst and cold, of chains and unending sorrow. This juxtaposition is not accidental. Ancient Jewish apocalyptic often works by contrast. Revelation clarifies by placing opposites close together. Blessedness and ruin are not far apart in the moral imagination because both are responses to the same divine order. The third heaven, then, becomes a kind of courtroom image rendered as landscape. The world has not been left morally ambiguous. Choices have trajectories. Faithfulness ripens toward one kind of end. Corruption hardens toward another. The paradise Enoch sees is more than reward scenery. It is a restoration of harmony. In later descriptions, it is prepared for the righteous, especially for those who remained true under pressure, who gave bread to the hungry, clothing to the naked, mercy to the weak, justice to the vulnerable. That is significant. The vision does not reserve blessedness for the powerful, the clever, or the esoteric. It links eternal hope to lived righteousness, to concrete acts of fidelity and compassion. In that sense, the text is deeply continuous with the ethical pulse of biblical religion, where worship without justice is always exposed as hollow, and the place of punishment is described with equal seriousness, not as a lurid entertainment, but as consequence for those who deny the Creator, exploit the poor, spill blood, practice deceit, and give themselves to false worship. The text is severe, but it is not random. Judgment in this tradition is ethical before it is sensational. Those who deform the world answer for deforming it. That is what gives the ascent its force. Enoch is not being shown curiosities. He is being taught how heaven reads earth. The hidden places above are interpreting the visible life below. Human beings live as if their deeds vanish into time. The vision says otherwise. Nothing vanishes. Mercy is remembered. Violence is remembered. Allegiance is remembered. So by the time Enoch leaves the third heaven, he has already seen enough to undo any easy view of reality. The sky is not empty. Moral life is not private. Paradise is not myth in the childish sense, and judgment is not just a preacher's threat. In the world of this vision, both are prepared, both are real, and both stand waiting beyond the veil of ordinary sight. Chapter 4. The fourth heaven turns from destiny to order, from gardens and prisons to the great clockwork of light. Here, Enoch sees the movements of the sun and the moon, their appointed paths, their gates, their measures, the angelic beings connected to their service, and the astonishing discipline with which time itself is kept. For many readers, this section of the tradition feels strange, even excessive. Why so much interest in roots, intervals, gates, cycles, and calculations? Why this almost priestly attention to celestial regularity? Because in the ancient world, time was not neutral. Calendars shaped worship, agriculture, kingship, pilgrimage, fasting, harvest, law, and memory. To know when a feast was to be kept was not trivial administration, it was obedience. To keep sacred time wrongly could be imagined as disorder at the heart of communal life. In later Jewish literature, concern for the right ordering of time becomes intense, especially in circles that believed the world below had fallen out of alignment with heaven above. The motions of the luminaries, then, were not merely observational science. They were a revelation of divine faithfulness. So Enoch is shown the heavenly routes of the sun and the moon. He sees gates of rising and setting. He sees the disciplined progression of days, months, seasons, and years. He learns that the lights do not wander by whim, they serve. Even the great blazing sun, which in many ancient cultures tempted men toward worship, is here demoted from deity to obedient creature. It is magnificent, but it is not sovereign. It keeps its appointed course because the Creator has fixed its work. That is one of the quiet polemics of texts like this. In the ancient Near East, sun, moon, and stars were often associated with gods or treated as powers deserving veneration. Israel's scriptures consistently resist that move. The heavenly lights are creations, not rivals to the Creator. The fourth heaven dramatizes that conviction. The luminaries are glorious, but their glory is derivative. Their regularity is a form of submission. Later tradition adds extraordinary creatures around the sun, phoenix-like and chalky-dry-like beings, whose imagery feels exotic even within apocalyptic literature. Their appearance signals something important about how these writers imagined cosmic splendor. The heavens are not bare mechanisms. They are alive with praise, strange with forms too vivid for ordinary language. Yet again, the effect is not to distract from God, but to surround divine rule with grandeur. Enoch watches and learns that time itself can be an act of worship. Morning comes when it is appointed to come. Evening yields when it is appointed to yield. The year does not collapse into chaos because the heavens hold their course. In a world before clocks, before astronomy as we know it, before the abstraction of minutes divorced from meaning, this is a profoundly theological vision. Order is mercy. Repetition is faithfulness. The sunrise is not boring because it repeats. It is trustworthy because it repeats. That may be why the script slows here. After the moral shocks of the lower heavens, the fourth heaven offers a different kind of revelation. It says that the world does not merely contain moments of divine intervention. It is sustained by divine constancy. The same God who judges rebellion also keeps the lights on their path. The same moral order that punishes violence also gives seed time and harvest their measured place. And there is another layer. The detailed concern for heavenly cycles in Enochic tradition reflects a broader Second Temple Jewish fascination with hidden wisdom. This was a period when many Jews lived under foreign empires, when the temple itself could be contested, when questions of purity, rightful worship, and true knowledge pressed hard. In that setting, to know the order of heaven was to possess a kind of resistance against confusion below. If earthly powers lied, heaven still measured rightly. If communities disagreed, the sun still kept its course. That is why Enoch's role grows in importance. He is not only a traveler, he is becoming a scribe of order. The man who was taken because he walked with God is now being taught how creation itself walks with God, through obedient pattern, through exact measure, through unwavering service. This is revelation, not as raw emotion, but as structure. The moon, too, with all its changing phases, becomes part of that lesson. It waxes and wanes, appears and recedes, marking times and limits. Where the sun can suggest constancy, the moon suggests change within constancy, variation that does not break order. Together, they frame a vision of the cosmos in which even change is governed. By the end of this heaven, Enoch has seen that history unfolds under a disciplined sky. Men may forget, empires may rise and fall, violence may spread, households may grieve, but above them all, the appointed lights continue their course. The implication is hard to miss. Human disorder is not ultimate. There is a higher order that has not failed. And that raises a more difficult question, the one the next stage of the journey will not let him avoid. If the heavens are so well ordered, how did rebellion enter at all? If even sun and moon serve faithfully, what does it mean for beings made for glory to refuse their place? Enoch has seen imprisoned rebels from a distance. Soon he will stand before another company of fallen powers and hear the silence of those who once sang. Chapter 5. The fifth heaven is heavy before it is luminous. The beings Enoch finds here are neither shining servants at ease nor prisoners buried in the blackness below. They are suspended in grief, enormous, diminished, waiting. Tradition calls them the Grigori, the Watchers, and the choice of name matters. Watchers are not supposed to be sleepers. They are attendants, guardians, heavenly sentinels. To call them fallen is one thing, to see them broken is another. This is where the old fragment in Genesis 6 grows into one of the great dramas of Jewish imagination. The biblical text itself is famously spare. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful. They took wives, and in those days there were giants on the earth. What exactly that means has always been debated. Some later interpreters saw angelic beings crossing a forbidden line. Others understood the passage more humanly, as the corruption of noble lineages or rulers. But the Enochic tradition takes the first path and builds on it with enormous force. The watchers descend. Desire becomes rebellion. Knowledge becomes corruption. Violence spreads. The earth is filled with blood. In 2 Enoch, the details differ from 1 Enoch in places, and it is important not to flatten the traditions into one text, but the moral core is shared. Boundary breaking brings ruin. The heavenly order is not infinitely elastic. To abandon one's appointed station is not freedom, it is catastrophe. So Enoch stands before beings who once belonged to the heights and now live under the burden of judgment delayed. Their silence is one of the most haunting moments in the whole ascent. They do not sing, they do not rejoice. They have memory without restoration, power without peace. In some versions, Enoch exhorts them to bless the Lord, to return to praise while there is still time before the final sentence is carried out. It is an extraordinary reversal. A man instructs angels, a mortal calls celestial rebels back to worship. That scene works because it exposes the true center of the story. The greatest tragedy is not punishment. It is rupture in the relationship for which a being was made. The Watchers are terrible not because they are monstrous curiosities, but because they are images of misplaced desire and broken vocation. Their fall gives cosmic scale to a truth that also governs ordinary human life. Creatures are not made stronger by rejecting their limits. They are unmade by it. From there, Enoch is led to the 6th heaven, and the atmosphere changes again. Here the vision becomes administrative, almost liturgical in its precision. He sees great angels charged with the oversight of creation and human affairs, rulers over seasons and years, over rivers and seas, over fruits of the earth, over every green thing that feeds living creatures, over the recording of human souls and deeds before the Lord. This is one of the most revealing sections in the whole text, because it joins the cosmic and the ethical without embarrassment. The same heaven that cares about the courses of stars also cares about the actions of men. In modern imagination, those categories often separate. Nature is one thing, morality is another. In ancient apocalyptic thought, they belong together under a single sovereignty. The God who appoints times also weighs lives. The scribal note is especially important. Some angels write, they keep account. Deeds are not lost in memory's fog. The world is not morally anonymous. For a culture where written record already carried authority in law, covenant, inheritance, and kingship, the image of heavenly writing was powerful. To be recorded before God was to be truly known. Nothing could be hidden behind reputation, distance, or death. It is here that Enoch's own identity as a scribe begins to come fully into focus. He has been watching. Soon he will write. That is not accidental. In the world of these texts, writing is more than storage. It is participation in order. To write truthfully is to align with heaven's own testimony. Enoch becomes credible, not because he invents marvels, but because he receives a commission to preserve what has been shown. The 6th heaven also widens the moral imagination of the journey. The angels there are not merely wardens and measurers. They sustain life. They oversee provision. They connect divine government to daily bread. This keeps the ascent from becoming cold. Heaven is not only about judgment and splendor, it is also about care. Grass grows under supervision. Rivers flow within appointment. Living things receive food through an ordered generosity built into creation. That kind of worldview can sound strange to modern ears, but it carries a stern comfort. It says the world is not abandoned to accident. Even in an age of corruption, provision has not vanished. Even in an age moving toward flood, care continues.